What is up, everybody? This is John Major. I'm going to be talking about finite state machines in React.js. So, what is a finite state machine? So, a finite state machine basically describes an array of states that a machine can be in at any given time, but it can only be in one of those states at a given time. It can't be in more than one state. Okay, so I'm going to use the traffic light example. I have it up here. It's in the XState documentation. Let me just scroll down. So this is the traffic light example. We initialize the state at green, and then we transition to yellow, then to red, and then back to green. And as you suspect, it would be very dangerous if you can be in green and red at the same time. We would cause a lot of accidents. It would be just mass mayhem. And so that's why we use a finite state machine to describe the states, and we can only then be in one state at a time. And we don't have, states described alone from each other, and the next thing you know, you're in both states, because that would be bad. Because we don't want accidents, and we don't want planes crashing. We don't want, anything bad happening when we talk about, not using state machines. All right, so in this case, we don't have a state machine here. We have the example where we're just using, I see this a lot, where we have like a couple of states that describe the state that we're in, say in terms of fetching. It's pretty common. Probably seen it too. You've probably done it also. Is where we have like a loading state, and then we have a loaded state. And again, they're described separately from each other. So that means we can be in both of those states at the same time. Like we can have, like in this case, we have both of these states initialized to false. So they're in the same state at the same time. And then they could be in the same state at the same time when they're true. We don't want that, because then we have this problem where we can set loading to false and set loaded to true. I'm sorry, set loaded to false and set loaded to false. So we don't want to be able to be in the same state, because then in this case we have this problem where we turn off the loading indicator, and we also say that it didn't load, but in reality, it did. Like the response was successful, right? So we should be able to see the Pokemon results, but we can't, because when we click search, we see the loading indicator, and then we don't see the response in our UI. We're going to make all those Pokemon users very angry. So to fix this, we're going to use this quick pattern. And this pattern is not where we're going to end. We're going to end with using XState. But if you can't bring an XState into your application for some reason, use this pattern. It's better than this. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to change... I guess first, before I start coding, this pattern, to me, I've taken it from RemoteData. This is where I've first seen it. Other people are using it too. This isn't anything like brand new, in terms of like Elm has been doing this for quite some time right now. And I don't use Elm at all. I just know from people who I've talked to. So that being said, RemoteData is this paradigm of using a finite state machine describing what state can the request be in at any given time. So we got not asked, loading, failure, success. And it can only be in one of those states. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the same pattern called RemoteData. And so we're going to say that our state here is going to be called RemoteData. And then we're going to set RemoteData. This will be then a string, and we're going to call this not asked. We don't need this state anymore, and we're going to change this now to remote, or set, not screen, set remote data. And this now becomes loading, And this now becomes success because we're always successful. We don't have failure because we don't fail at all. But no, really, in your own application, in a real application, you should probably catch failure. In our case, we're not. So we're going to say remote data is equal to loading. If I can spell, remote data is equal to success. All right, so this should work. We should be able to see it work now. Cool. So it worked. Again, this is a really good pattern to use if you can't bring in XState. I think XState's really good for many more things than just like representing the finite states of fetching data. There's a lot more, right, that we can do with it. We can build traffic lights in React.js. But we're not going to do that here. We're going to use XState to fetch Pokemon data. I already have XState as a dependency and also XState React as a dependency. So I'm going to start by importing use machine. And you can probably guess where this is coming from. This is coming from our XState React library. And then we need to import machine. This is coming from XState, and we should be good to start. Let's describe our machine down here, and we're going to call it fetch Pokemon machine. And then assign this to machine. And let's start editing this config. We're going to give it an ID. You can find the documentation more on the website for XState, GitHub also. I know what I want, so I'm not going to like go back and forth between the documentation. Also, I've been only using XState now for a few days, and I've been loving it. So now that I have my ID, I'm going to also set an initial state. And we're going to set this to be not asked. So we're going to follow the same pattern, remote data pattern. And then we're going to say we have states. So our states, we have not asked. And then we have loading. And then we have success. And we have failure, which we don't handle, but we'll keep it here for now so we can potentially play with using failure. All right, let's now use this fetch Pokemon machine. So this is a hook, and our first thing that we're going to pop off is going to be called current. Current is going to describe the representation of the state machine on that given render. And then the second thing is going to be send, which is a function to send an action to the state machine to then transition from into the next state. So again, this is the hook, use machine. So we have to use our fetch Pokemon machine there. And then now we should be able to log out current, and we should see a whole bunch of stuff. All right, so here is our stuff that we get back. Again, we get quite a bit back, but we're not really worried about everything here. But you do see that the value is not asked. That is our current state that we are in. And how we transition to not asked is because our initial state is not asked. So we start off as not asked. And then what we want to do is we want to respond to an action. And how we send an action is, again, by using that send method. And then we want to respond here from receiving that send method. And how we do that is we say on then we got to provide it what are we responding to. We're going to respond to an action called fetch, which will then kick us to loading. So it's going to transition us to the loading state. And how we send an action is just how we call any function. We are going to call it with our parens, and we're going to say fetch. All right, so I'm going to remove or comment this out so we have less noise here. And now we should be able to see when we click send or click search, we're going to send off this action called fetch, and then it's going to, our state machine is going to respond to fetch and then transition us to loading. Cool. So again, from not asked, we go to loading. So we're in our loading state. So that means we are right here. We can repeat using on, and then we can say fetch and then transition to success and keep doing that. But it doesn't make sense to do that here. In loading, well, we are loading data. So that means we have to invoke, a function to be called. And so what we can do here is we can use this property called Invoke. And then inside Invoke, we then give it a function to invoke by providing it a property called source. Source has a couple arguments to it, context and event. We're not going to use them. What we're going to do now is we're going to cut and paste what we have here down below. So paste that here, uncomment. Let's see if we can format this. Did not want to format on save, so we will just tab it over. Come on. All right, I think that's good. Set this to be async, so I can spell. And then we should be good, right? Save that. Cool. So what we're going to do then is log out what is result. And we should see the data. So from not asked, we go to loading, and then boom, we invoke that function. And then we get our data back. And inside our response, we have this object called, or not called, but we have this object with count, next, previous, and results. And so what we really care about is results. But anywho, we are going to then respond to the promise being successful. We can respond also to it failing. And so how we can do that is by using this property called onDone, which is going to respond to it being successful. And then you can maybe guess what this next property is. We're going to respond to it being an error. So this is going to be on error. These objects can take several different properties, but we're going to use target. Target is then going to allow us to transition from that onDone event to success. And then same thing goes for here. We're going to be able to transition from on error to failure. So then now let's run this again. So we go from loading to success because, well, it was successful. Now let's imagine we got rejected. Well, we should then go from loading to failure. And so you can hopefully see like how a state machine using XState can really build up and provide value. And if not, keep looking for it. I hope that you see how much value XState can bring you, especially when you start describing like bigger finite state machines. In this case, we only have a few states that we can be in at a time. But again, we can have a different, a different machine that could offer more states. And we don't want to, again, have that traffic light example where we have it on red and it on green, and the next, cars are crashing. So enough said. Now that we got this on done state, or let's remove this, we're going to return our result here. And then now here we have something called actions. And so when we call an action, in this case, we want to assign data to state. And so how we do that is the state machine has this concept of context, just like how React has its context API. This is the same thing. It describes the state. So we're going to say that the data is going to start off null. And then we want to, on this action, assign data some value. So we're going to say when we hit success, we're also going to, or on done, when we hit on done, we're also going to run an action, which is going to assign the data some value. How we do that is we need to then pull off this thing called assign from XState. This is XState's way of setting state to context, just like how, like in a class-based component, you might see like this dot set state. This is the same, essentially like the same thing, but in this case, we call this assign, and then we pass in the property, and then the property then returns a method. And so we have an assignment. Okay, I was looking at what the definition that we were receiving here. It doesn't look like it is particularly giving us what we want to see. Anyways, not really too sure what that is saying at this moment in time, but I do know that we really only care about the second argument in this case, the event, which is going to be the result of the promise. And so we're going to say that, as you remember, that object, we had in there a few things inside that object, and we are really caring about the results of Pokemon, which is that array. And so we want to, let's just actually log out what we see here real quick. And then click search. All right, so we have this data object, which again has that same response object that I was talking about with results in it. And that's the thing that we care about. So what we can do is let's remove that, return to data. What was that object? It's going to be event.data.results. Cool. So that should give it to us. So if we hit search, we go from loading to success. Now success, we should see in context some data, which we do. Awesome. So now we're just really left, in this case, in this example, with cleaning up. So now that we have this data inside our context, inside our machine, we can then remove this state here. We don't need this state anymore because everything is inside here. And we're just going to remove this log because we don't need that. We're going to remove this. We don't need that. We're going to change this remote data to be current.value because current.value is describing the state that we're in. So if you look over here in the console, we're in either not asked, loading, success. So then now that we have that, we need to update here, and we're going to say current dot context dot data. Boom. So it works. So this is great. Now we can take this machine and take it wherever we want to go. And when we fetch Pokemon, it's going to be the same, which is great because we don't want the traffic light example where we have where we have lights that are in multiple states at a time. And so a good way to think about this is instead of like fetching something so specific like Pokemon, well, when we fetch just data from any like API, we want to be able to describe this remote data pattern. We don't want to be able to be in 2 states or 3 states at a time. Like we don't want to be in not asked and then loading and then success and shoot and in failure. We want to only be in 1 state at a time. So using a state machine like this allows us to be able to describe all the states that we have and then what state that we can be in at any given time, and then how do we transition from one state to another. And so that's it. That's what I want to talk about is state machines in React. I love it. Again, I've been using XState for only a few days now, and I'm like almost swearing by it. So it's great. Please give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, depending on how you like this video. Leave a comment. Let me know more feedback. And I will see you all next time.